if we do a better job, just as a community, as elected officials and servants, on educating our people how critically important advocacy and their vote is, I think it would definitely change. But the other thing, too, I want to share is that when you vote, when you register to vote and you go vote, that's great. But you also have to make sure that you're holding the leaders accountable after election. So your work as a citizen begins on November the 4th, because you need to hold those leaders that have been elected, whether you voted for them or not, accountable to make sure they represent you and that they know what your issues and concerns are.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to go straight to the parties. I think the Democrats, the Republicans, the Libertarians, and even the Independents, just like in the Democratic Party, they have the Young Democrats. Okay, how many people that are millennials or high schoolers or junior high schoolers know that there are opportunities in all of these political parties, even before they're eligible to vote? You've got to plant the seed. Mm-hmm. So I want to put the challenge to all the parties. First of all, they need to reach out. Okay, they need to reach out, because I've always felt that with registration, there must be education. Yep. Because if you register a person to vote, but if you don't give them the tools of the significance and the importance of their exercising their constitutional right that people died for, went to jail for, were in prison for. So the earlier we can plant that seed in the millennials and younger, then we need to do that. So, but it has to be a purpose-filled opportunity. The other thing is that I think that candidates that are running for office, or those that currently sit in office, get a group of kids to go pass out flyers, talk to them and let them know the position that you're running for. So it gives them an understanding, oh, you're running for this, and this is how it affects my life. Mm-hmm. Because in the past, I've worked with candidates, and I always challenged them, get the youth involved. Mm-hmm. But I said, but don't just use the youth. You're going to sit down and talk to the youth. Before you run for office, explain to them about the office that you're running, the significance that it plays in the community, how it can affect their lives. So then when they go out to pass out those flyers in the neighborhood, they understand who they're passing them out for. Mm-hmm. It's not just associated with a stipend or $10 or $20. That's not the motivator. Whenever you have a captive audience, you have to educate. Mm-hmm. That's my thing. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that with the State House, like Kenneth just pointed out, they have pages and whatnot. For years, I've asked the city county council to bring in youth groups, to mentor. Let them be a part of that local process. Yeah. Okay? It's the same thing to township government. Whatever levels of government there ought to be opportunities for youth engagement. That is how you plant the seed of opportunity and create your future leaders, ergo your future voters. But, everybody, we're in a fast food society. It's like, where's my motivation? Mm-hmm. Why should I get involved in this? Mm-hmm. Well, if you haven't done your work to enable millennials, or even the generation behind after the millennials, mm-hmm. to understand the significance of your vote, the history of how people, and we acquired the right to vote, because the Civil Rights Act is just an act still, okay? And so, getting people to understand, teaching them their history.
Wait, explain that. Say that again. The Civil Rights Act is what?
It's just an act.
And so what does that mean?
It has to be reinstated, reaffirmed, okay? And see how many black people, people of color, those that are not voting, understand even that bit of history. And so to the millennials, I challenge you. Look, you got to know the shoulders upon which we stand. Because if you don't know the history, you can't prepare for the future. That's right. You can go on automatic all day long, love the passion. I love the energy, but you got to know the history, because that's how any person of any substance or length of time, they stand on the shoulders of those that came before them. You just can't go out there willy-nilly, because if you don't know the history, you're not hitting the point. Right. You've got to have that foundation.
Yeah, and I think what I've learned, or what I see with sometimes millennials, is because they're so far removed from our history, and we live in this age where they haven't really experienced racism like we've experienced. I'm 43, and then Kim is...
Well, and to that point, my son My son and I have debates about it because he was born into a world he could live where he wanted to. You could love who you wanted to.
Right.
He could go to any school he wanted to. And I never will forget, we had this big debate, and I forget the retailer, but they had a picture of a little black child. This was about a year ago. And they had a little child with a monkey on the T-shirt. You remember that?
H&M.
H&M.
And so my son and I had
a
my son and I had a conversation. He said, well, Mama, why are people like you getting so upset about the little boy, just a little boy with him? I said, and so then I had to give him that history. I'm gonna tell you why there's a difference, okay? Because that's the way we were depicted in a negative light. And so, and he said, oh wow, but see, that's the millennial bridge we need to make. They were born into opportunities that we never had.
Right.
Okay? I remember George Wallace as a governor in 1965. Okay, did standing on the steps denying black children the right to education. Okay? And I grew up in Gary too, so I kind of like you a little bit more. But I pre-Obama. In 65, I saw Richard Gordon Hatcher become the first mayor, he and Carl Stokes. At that time of major cities, the first ever in the history of the United States. But I grew up in a city where people were the teachers. They were the churches. They were the leaders. They were the political entities. So I grew up with that voice of like, hey, we can do anything. And in school, government econ, they bring in those voting machines before you're even old enough to register to vote. Yeah. Because a lot of black people today don't want to vote. They're like, well, I don't know how to vote. That's some of the reason. It's not the whole reason. So again, we got to reach out, and those that are already in position need to get in position with the future.
So I want just real quick, Kenneth, you mentioned something about how policy impacts their daily life. So just kind of give some examples for the millennials who may be listening or watching about some real live tangible examples of policy and how it can impact their daily life.
So I remember when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri, and a good friend of mine pastored there at the time at Willis Johnson, right, not too far from where he got killed. I remember Jesse Jackson came to Ferguson, and a lot of the millennials was like, man, we don't need you and Al Sharpton here. And, they were talking about, hey, you guys need to get registered to vote. Y'all need to change this counseling. Man, we don't want to hear all that. And he said, well, let me ask you this. Wouldn't you like Michael Brown to have a jury of his peers? They say, absolutely. Don't you want people on the jury to look like him? Say, well, it starts with registering to vote. You won't even get called to be a juror if you're not registered to vote. And so that's one example of a recent example of how important it is, one, to be registered to vote. But secondly, if you do get that call, you need to answer the phone because they're making decisions that would affect you or people that you love and care about. So that's one example, I think, that how policy on a local level affects us. And a lot of people don't know that how critically important it is just to even be registered.
Okay. You want to add anything to that?
The only thing I would say beyond that, it's a very good example as well, Kenneth, that you mentioned. But I would just say the advocacy. I think that people, and I've always said this throughout my years, go and spend a day at a city county council meeting. Go and spend a day in court, criminal court. Go spend a day in mental health court. Go spend a day in traffic court. Because the way the city government is set up, citizens have that right to speak and remonstrate and voice their opinion. And so hopefully they are a registered voter, but in terms of that voice and that advocacy that can really shape issues when a council votes for something, when the state office holders vote for something, when a school board votes for something. If the elected candidate is really tuned in to their constituency, okay, because that's who does vote when they elect that representative to represent them. But you always have your voice. You never let your voice go. And your voice, whether you realize it or not, can shape laws, can enact legislation. And so I would just like to see, for those that think that they don't make a difference, you can always make a difference.
Yeah. One of the things I add too is that because of this pandemic, COVID-19, it's easier to participate. You know, back in the day, you would have to park your car, go downtown, try not to make sure your car get towed. But now a lot of these meetings, if not all of them, are virtual, and so you can participate from the comforts of your smartphone. If you want to engage or send a question, you know, you don't have that barrier of actually having to go through security and wait in line and, I got a warrant, so, you know, they may be looking for me and all that. So a lot of those barriers have been removed in light of the pandemic.
Okay.
The only thing I want to say, I'm going to give a little pushback on that one. The only thing I'm going to say about that, because I'm thinking about ground zero, the homeless, you know, those that are poverty level. While I do
Don't have access to technology.
yes, they have to have the affordability. You know, I mean, just like in the school systems, a lot of parents, they can't even afford internet. You know, and Comcast, you know, has a deal where you can get it for $9.95. Well, for some families, $9.95 is like asking for $9,995.
Exactly.
So we also must, while that is true,
Yep.
but we also make sure that whatever resources we put out there in the community, no matter if you're 8 to 80, rich or poor, that everyone is equally accessible to whatever opportunities there are.
Okay. We're going to move on to question number 2. This one is a good question. Many people believe their vote doesn't count, i.e. voter suppression, elections rigged, electoral college possesses all the power. What would you say to someone who believes their vote does not count, Big Sis?
I'm going to, you know, for a lot of people, I'm going to try to paint a visual picture. Okay? Because I'm a visual person. You know, I like to touch it, feel it, get it in my head. I want to make the analogy that, you know, a vote is essential, but let's equate it to your vote is key. It's a key. It's a key. Now, if somebody gives you a key to a car, if you utilize that key and unlike that, you can drive. You can have freedom of transportation. You don't have to be dependent on anybody else to give you a ride, okay? You can get there faster, quicker, hopefully without incident. Same thing if somebody gives you a key to a house. If you use that key to open up the door to that house, then you can sleep in a bed and get the comfort of what the food is, if you're lucky, in the refrigerator, okay? When you don't vote, you give up your key. You give up your key to access food, housing, sitting on a jury, the things that shape your life, because every day of our lives, it is politically driven. If it's nothing else but the taxes that we pay when you go buy that loaf of bread, okay, or all the paper plates I've been seeing lately, okay, the taxes that people go when they buy their car, all those things are politically. So when you don't utilize your key, okay, at this point we're talking about your vote, your voice, then basically you've left yourself shut outside with no transportation, nowhere to live, because you've given it up. The other thing I want to point out is that when you look at the margins, for those that do the dive into the political newsworthy shows, okay, and then we're full of them right now, okay, overwhelmed with them. But again, when you hear that the percentage of the voter and say a candidate lost by 816 votes, let's theoretically throw that number out there. If those 816 people had voted, if they felt that was the better candidate, then that candidate would be representing them. Just that 816 people that decided to stay at home. So every vote makes a difference. And if you don't participate and use your key, that is your voice, that unlocks the door of opportunity for you, then don't complain, because you've done nothing to rectify the situation. And so when you get the housing discrimination, when you get the food denial, when you go to the trustee's office and they don't pay your rent, okay? Or if you go to housing where you don't fit the income guidelines, you gave away your key to be a part of deciding your fate, your opportunity, and your processes locally for your government, yourself, and your children. And if you don't care about their education, you don't care where you live, and you don't care about all these politicians that are out here elected that you feel like are not doing a good job, then don't say anything about it because you've given away your key.
Okay. That's good. You've given away your key, your right to access. Kenneth, before I chime in, I'm going to let you go ahead.